The call came on a Sunday night while I was washing dishes. My wife's phone was on the kitchen counter, face up, for once, and I saw the name before it stopped ringing. Not a name I recognized. Callaway. 3 seconds, then voicemail. I noted it the way you note a car slowing on your street at night. A small alertness, quickly dismissed. Her phone rang again 12 minutes later. Same name. She was upstairs putting our daughter to bed. I didn't answer it. I dried my hands and put it back exactly as I'd found it. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 38 years old. I teach high school history, 11th and 12th grade, at a school in the north side of Chicago where the hallways smell like floor wax and ambition and the specific exhaustion of adolescents who are trying very hard. I am not a suspicious man by nature. My colleagues describe me as methodical, steady, the kind of person who plans a unit in September and delivers exactly what he planned. My students call me Mr. Webb and mostly mean it respectfully. My wife, Renata, is 36. She's a hospital administrator, patient services coordinator at a large regional medical center downtown. We have a daughter named Isla, who is 6 and currently obsessed with drawing horses. We have been married 8 years. We live in a 2-flat that we converted to a single-family home when Isla was born, on a block with old oaks that lift the sidewalk in irregular waves. We were a good team. We worked hard. We were tired in the way all parents of young children are tired, and I think I mistook that tiredness for the shape of our marriage, rather than a temporary condition sitting on top of it. I mention the phone call now because it was, in retrospect, the first note in a sequence I should have heard as a chord. At the time, I heard nothing. 3 weeks later, Renata's mother had a health episode. A fall. A precautionary hospital stay in Milwaukee where her parents retired. Renata drove up on a Thursday afternoon. She stayed through the weekend. She called each evening. She sounded worried but steady. She came home Sunday night with a bag of her mother's homemade pierogi and a story about hospital food. I had no reason to question any of it, which is why it took me until October, 4 months after that Sunday phone call, to discover that Renata's mother had not been admitted to any Milwaukee hospital that June. I know because I called to send flowers. The opening of this story functions on the principle of delayed detonation. The phone call, the name R. Callaway, registers as faintly anomalous but generates no immediate crisis. This is psychologically realistic. The human threat detection system is tuned to obvious danger, not to quiet, plausible irregularities. Marcus's self-description as methodical, steady is not merely character detail. It establishes the cognitive style that will both protect him and delay him. Methodical people build complete cases before drawing conclusions. This is a strength that functions in the early stages of betrayal as a vulnerability. The mother's hospitalization, presented as a naturally emotional, above suspicion event, represents the affair's most sophisticated camouflage. It exploits Marcus's empathy, weaponizing one of his best qualities against him. That the lie is not discovered for 4 months suggests either remarkable nerve on Renata's part or the degree to which Marcus extended the benefit of the doubt to the person he trusted most. That summer was humid and slow in the particular way Chicago summers can be. Thick air, the distant percussion of construction, the block smelling of cut grass and someone always barbecuing 2 doors down. I spent most of July working on my fall curriculum. Renata was on a new project at the hospital. An administrative overhaul that she said was long overdue and was, in practice, consuming her evenings and occasionally her weekends. I was accustomed to the rhythms of her work. Administration runs on crisis and committee in roughly equal measure. I helped with Isla. We cooked together when schedules allowed. We watched television in the evenings, her feet in my lap, and I remember thinking the summer felt ordinary in a way that was almost aggressively comfortable. That was the thing I missed. The comfort had become a kind of anesthetic. I noticed Renata had joined a new gym in late June. This was not unusual. She cycled through fitness commitments with the regularity of the academic year, joining in summer, lapsing by November. What was mildly unusual was the time. She went early mornings before Isla was up, leaving before 6 and returning by 7:15 smelling of soap. She had never been a morning person. For 11 years, I had been the one who navigated the 5:45 alarm with any degree of function. I teased her about it once. She smiled and said she'd turned a corner. The second thing I noticed was that she had begun to dress differently on workdays. Subtly, nothing dramatic, no sudden transformation. But there is a specific way a person dresses when they are trying to impress no one in particular, and a different way when they are dressing for someone. Renata had always been polished but unshowy. That summer she started wearing the dark green blouse I'd always liked, and the heels she usually saved for events, and a perfume I didn't recognize that she'd apparently bought without mentioning it. I noticed these things and interpreted them as a phase of self-confidence. She was doing well at work. She felt good. I told myself her happiness was good for us. Third, her sleep changed. Renata had always been a heavy sleeper. I'm the one who wakes at every creak. But I started noticing that she was sometimes awake in the small hours, the blue light of her phone briefly illuminating her face, gone before I could fully surface from sleep. Once, I came to full consciousness to find her side of the bed empty. She was back within 10 minutes. Bathroom, she said, half asleep, slipping back under the covers. I heard nothing in her voice to doubt. There is a version of this story where all of these things mean nothing. Where the gym represents genuine renewal, the clothes represent healthy self-esteem, the middle night phone use is insomnia. I ran that version of the story for longer than I should have, because it was more comfortable to live in. The detail I couldn't assimilate into the comfortable version was Isla's drawing. She had been drawing horses all summer, as I mentioned. Horses in various sizes and colors, horses with names she invented. She taped them to her bedroom wall in a growing gallery I found extremely endearing. In August, she brought me a drawing that was different. 2 figures, one tall with brown hair, clearly Renata, and a shorter figure with what appeared to be glasses, standing in front of a building she'd labeled in her careful 6-year-old printing. The river. I turned the drawing over in my hands. "Who's this with mommy?" I asked, pointing to the second figure. Isla shrugged with the magnificent unconcern of a child who has not yet learned what questions are dangerous. "The man from the river place. She takes me sometimes when you're working late." I looked at the building. The river. A restaurant or a bar, maybe. A name stylized to look casual and therefore expensive. "What man?" I asked. But she had already moved on to the next horse, and I didn't push her. Domesticity can function as both cover and evidence simultaneously. The changes in Renata's behavior, the gym, the wardrobe, the perfume, the nocturnal phone use, are individually explainable and collectively damning. What Marcus is experiencing is a classic pattern that researchers describe as ambient awareness without threshold activation. He has accumulated enough data for suspicion but not enough for conviction, and his interpretive generosity continuously reframes each observation in its most benign light. Isla's drawing is the section's most emotionally loaded detail. A child's art is among the most unguarded truth-telling devices in a domestic environment. She has no understanding of what she's transmitting. She is simply recording her world. The name, the river, precise enough to be searchable, delivered with complete innocence, represents the kind of accidental intelligence that affairs can never fully insulate themselves against. Children observe, absorb, and report without editorial filter. This is both their vulnerability and, in situations like this, their utility. I searched the river on a Tuesday evening in early September while Renata was giving Isla a bath and I was ostensibly grading papers at the kitchen table. It was a cocktail bar on the riverfront, upscale. The kind of place that used Edison bulbs and served drinks named after Chicago neighborhoods. Its Instagram showed a sunlit terrace, exposed brick, the kind of atmospheric lighting that made everything look like a first date. I looked at the Instagram for a long time. I was not yet ready to ask Renata about it directly. Partly this was the methodical caution that is my nature. I don't want to make an accusation without grounds. Partly, I understand now, it was something more complicated. A reluctance to set in motion something I could not control once it started. I did something more targeted. I searched the name R. Calloway, the number that had called her phone twice that Sunday in June, on every platform I could access. Nothing obvious. Then I tried Calloway Chicago with a few professional variations. On the 4th try, Robert Calloway Architect Chicago, I found a firm's website. A small firm, Riverfront Projects. I clicked on the team page. Robert Calloway, 41. A professional headshot. Lean, angular face, the particular look of someone who describes their work as adaptive. He had done renovation work along the riverfront. He had consulted on projects with the hospital system where Renata worked. I found a mention in a public facilities report from the previous year. So there was a connection, professional one, legitimate, and yet, I spent a week convincing myself it was nothing. They'd collaborated professionally. He'd called her on a Sunday because project people don't observe boundaries. She hadn't answered because she was with the kids. Nothing was wrong. Then, in late September, Renata told me she had a Saturday training conference. Mandatory, she said, compliance certification that couldn't be rescheduled. I nodded and arranged to take Isla to her dance class and the park. Renata left at 9:15 dressed in clothes that weren't what I'd wear to a compliance training. I dropped Isla at my sister's that afternoon on an errand and, hating myself thoroughly, drove to the address of Calloway's firm. His car, I'd found the model from a local business article photo caption, was not in the lot. I sat there for 8 minutes, feeling like a fool and a detective simultaneously, and then drove home. That evening, Renata came back with a lanyard around her neck, a conference lanyard, the kind you get at registration, and set it on the hall table. I glanced at it. The hospital logo, the date. I should have accepted it. But the lanyard was a small size, and the name on the badge was not hers. I didn't say anything. I went to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran the water for longer than necessary. The next day, I found the flower shop's number and called the Milwaukee hospital. The woman in patient services was efficient and apologetic. There had been no patient by her mother's surname admitted during that period. She checked twice. I thanked her and hung up. I sat with this for 3 days before I was able to form a coherent thought around it. For months after the fact, the Milwaukee trip collapsed into something entirely different. 6 days. Isla had been with my mother. I had sent flowers that apparently went somewhere else entirely or nowhere at all. My wife had not been at her mother's bedside in June. I needed to know where she had been. The investigation phase reveals the cruel efficiency of deception that has been carefully constructed. Renata's affair management is notably more sophisticated than Daniel's wife in the previous story. The professional connection to Calloway provides a plausible alibi architecture. The conference lanyard is a prop of real commitment. The lanyard detail is the section's pivot point. It is almost good enough. The wrong name is a small failure, the kind that happens when a plan is executed under pressure. But it is enough to shatter the constructed plausibility. The Milwaukee hospitalization reveals itself as the affair's most elaborate lie, leveraging filial love, geographic distance, and emotional untouchability to create an extended window. Marcus's 3 days of sitting with the knowledge before forming a coherent response reflects a form of psychological shock that is different from denial. He knows now. The silence is not avoidance. It is the space between knowing and being able to act on knowing. I am a history teacher. I tell my students repeatedly that the problem with primary sources is not that they lie, it's that they tell partial truths and require triangulation. You never trust a single source. You build an argument from convergence. I applied this to my own life with a thoroughness I am not entirely proud of. I went back through our shared Google Calendar, which we'd used since before Isla was born, and cross-referenced Renata's late nights at work against the hospital's public event calendar, board meetings, fundraiser galas, compliance deadlines, things that would actually keep a patient services coordinator late. The correlation was poor. At least 7 evenings in the last 4 months showed no corresponding public hospital activity. I checked our joint credit card more carefully. A pattern emerged. Small charges at the river on 4 separate occasions over the summer. Always during the day, always on my working hours. She had never mentioned going there, not once. I looked up the Milwaukee florist I'd used. They had no record of a delivery to the hospital that June. I paid by card. The card showed the charge. The flowers had gone. I eventually traced it through the florist to a residential address in Milwaukee's 3rd Ward. An address I did not recognize. I ran the address. Short-term rental. Listed on 2 platforms. Available for weekend stays. I sat with this information for 2 days and thought about all the things it could mean and admitted to myself that it most likely meant one thing. There was a layer to this I hadn't anticipated, and it came from a direction I wasn't watching. My friend and colleague at school, a man named Dennis, who has been teaching English in the room next to mine for 6 years, pulled me aside one morning with the specific awkwardness of someone about to say something they've debated saying for weeks. "I wasn't sure whether to bring this up," he said. I told him to bring it up. He'd been at a fundraising event in July for a riverfront park project. He'd seen Renata there. He had said hello. She'd been surprised, maybe flustered. She was with a group that included a man he described in the careful neutral way people choose when they're avoiding a conclusion. Seemed like he knew her well. He hadn't thought much of it until he'd noticed, over the following weeks, that I seemed distracted. He'd put it together slowly. "I could be wrong," he said. "You're not," I said. He looked relieved and guilty in equal measure. I thanked him and went back to my classroom and stared at the wall map of Europe until my 8 o'clock arrived. The final piece came from Renata's own carelessness. She had a secondary phone. I found it not through investigation but through pure accident. It slipped from between the driver's seat and the center console when I moved her car to the back of the garage. A cheap Android, prepaid. Unlocked. I held it in the driveway in the gray October light. I'm a primary source man. I believe in direct evidence. I turned it on. The messages were there. Robert Calloway. 7 months of them detailed, warm, and specific in the ways that made denial impossible. The Milwaukee weekend was there. Several evenings were there. The planning, the coordination, the small daily intimacies. And one message from 2 weeks ago that I read 3 times. I think he's starting to notice. We need to be more careful. She had known. She had adjusted her caution. She had not stopped. Marcus approaches betrayal the way he teaches history, through triangulation of sources, convergence of evidence, refusal to rest on a single point of proof. This is both admirable and psychologically complex, because it also means he spends more time inside the investigation than might be healthy, building a case that he is simultaneously desperate to complete and desperate to never finish. Dennis' conversation is an important structural element. A third party with direct observational data changes the nature of the evidence. It moves from circumstantial to testimonial. Dennis's discomfort, the delay between seeing and telling, is realistic. Most people are profoundly reluctant to introduce information that will cause pain to someone they care about. The prepaid phone is the affair's fatal material error. It was intended as additional insulation. It became, through a car seat gap, the most comprehensive single piece of evidence available. The final message, I think he's starting to notice, is particularly devastating. It confirms that Renata has been aware of the risk of discovery and has made an active choice to continue. This forecloses certain explanations that might otherwise soften the moral weight of her actions. I put the phone back where I found it. Not because I was finished, because I needed to decide what to do with what I knew before Renata knew I knew it. I've seen, in the history I teach, what happens when people act before they've thought. Decisions made in the acute phase of shock tend to prioritize emotional relief over strategic clarity. I did not want to have a confrontation that I hadn't thought through. Took 2 days. I spoke to a lawyer, a brief consultation, enough to understand my position. I transferred a portion of the joint savings account to a personal account, something the lawyer suggested as a precautionary step. I called my mother and asked if she could take Isla for a Saturday without explaining why. I chose a Saturday evening. Isla at my mother's. No performance event, no work excuse, no reason for Renata to be anywhere but home. I cooked dinner. This was deliberate. I wanted her to feel the normality of the evening until I chose to end it. I made chicken with lemon and herbs, something I hadn't made in months, and opened a bottle of wine, and we sat across from each other in our kitchen with the familiar sounds of the neighborhood coming in through the window screens, and she talked about a difficult case at work and asked how my week had been. I listened. I answered. I watched her face. After dinner, I placed the prepaid phone on the table between us. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. The silence was complete. Outside, someone's wind chimes moved. "Marcus, I know about Milwaukee," I said. "I know about the conference lanyard. I know about the river and the Sunday calls and the rental in the 3rd ward. I know about 7 months of messages on this phone." I kept my voice level. I had rehearsed this in a way, not the words but the register. What I don't know yet is what you're planning to tell me. She put her hands flat on the table. She didn't cry immediately. I respected that, in some peripheral way, that she didn't default to tears as management. I don't know where to start, she said. Start with whether it's still happening. A pause. No. I ended it 3 weeks ago. I absorbed this. Why? Because, she stopped. Started again. Because I kept looking at Isla and thinking about what I was doing to you. To this. She looked at the room around us briefly and then back at her hands. And because I think I was punishing you for something I never told you I was angry about. And that's not fair. It's not fair to you. This was the moment I hadn't prepared for. What were you angry about? I asked. What came out in the next 30 minutes was something we had never discussed in 8 years. Or rather, something she had never managed to fully articulate and I had never fully invited. The years after Isla's birth. The way I had receded into work and routine while she had managed the majority of the invisible labor of the household, the pediatric appointments, the school logistics, the emotional maintenance. She had tried to raise it. I had, she said, a way of seeming to listen and then changing nothing, which she eventually experienced as worse than not listening at all. I sat with this. I am a fair man. I try to be. And I could see, looking honestly at the years she was describing, that she was not manufacturing grievance. There had been an imbalance. I had been aware of it in the abstract way a person is aware of a problem they've decided to address later. Later had not come. That doesn't explain 7 months, I said finally. No, she said. It doesn't. We talked until midnight. I slept in the room that had been Isla's before she grew out of her toddler bed. Now a barely converted home office with a pull-out couch. The house was very quiet. I lay in the dark and thought about the history teacher's fundamental principle. That understanding events requires sitting with uncomfortable complexity, resisting the clean narrative, accepting that causes are multiple and that none of them justify the outcome while all of them explain it. It didn't make it hurt less. It made it something I could think about honestly. The confrontation here differs significantly from the previous stories. Marcus's preparation, the lawyer, the account transfer, the deliberate construction of a normal evening as context, reflects a man who has decided to exercise control over the one thing available to him, the terms of engagement. He has no control over what Renata did. He has full control over how this conversation begins. Renata's revelation that she ended the affair 3 weeks prior introduces genuine moral ambiguity. She acted before being caught. Whether this represents conscience or fear of discovery is unresolvable, but it changes the emotional texture of the confrontation. More significantly, her articulation of long-standing grievance about the invisible labor imbalance reframes the narrative retroactively. This does not transform the affair from a betrayal into something permissible, but it locates it in a causal chain that began long before Robert Calloway existed. Marcus's capacity to hear this, to sit with it, test it against his honest memory, and partially confirm it, is the story's most psychologically mature moment. It is also, for many viewers, its most uncomfortable one. It implicates him in a quieter way, and quieter implications are always the hardest to dismiss. We tried, for a while, to stay. This surprises people when I tell them. But I was not interested in the obvious narrative, the discovery, the confrontation, the exit. I was interested in the truth of what had happened, and I was not yet sure what it was. Renata had ended the affair before I found out. She had identified a real failure in how I had been present in the marriage. We had a 6-year-old daughter who deserved both her parents trying before giving up. We went to couples therapy in November. A woman named Dr. Gaines who had the particular quality of never seeming to take sides while consistently refusing to let either of us be comfortable in our own narrative. I found her excellent. Renata found her exhausting, which I think meant she was doing her job. We spent 4 months in that room and in the kitchen and in careful late-night conversations after Isla was asleep, and at the end of 4 months we knew something we perhaps could have guessed. The marriage could be rebuilt technically, but something in us or something in Renata was not willing to rebuild it. The affair had been, for her, not only a betrayal of our marriage but a way of answering a question she'd been asking for a long time. The question was whether she still wanted the life she had. The answer, it turned out, was complicated. We separated in March. Amicably is too clean a word, nothing about it was clean but without cruelty. She stayed in the house with Isla through the school year. I moved into an apartment 6 blocks away, close enough that Isla could theoretically walk between our places and sometimes did, with appropriate escort. We worked out a schedule that centered Isla's routine above everything else. Isla took it as children do in waves. Some weeks she was fine. Some weeks she brought her horse drawings to my apartment and lined them up on the window ledge in a row without explaining why, which I understood to mean she needed to mark the space as also hers. She was right. It was hers. Robert Calloway, as far as I know, did not become a permanent part of Renata's life. I asked once, and she said they had ended things and she wasn't sure what that absence felt like yet. I chose not to follow up. What I think about now, more than Calloway or the prepaid phone or the Milwaukee weekend, is the conversation at midnight. The invisible labor. The years she had been carrying things I had not acknowledged because I had not looked. I was present in the ways I valued presence. Provider involved father, reliable, and absent in the ways she needed, which I had either not fully understood or had understood and quietly chosen to deprioritize. I'm not interested in self-punishment, but I am interested in accuracy. History teaches this is not a lesson I constructed for the occasion. It is something I actually believe, that most failures are overdetermined. Multiple causes accumulated over time, each one insufficient alone. The assignment of a single villain and a single cause is almost always a simplification that serves emotional convenience over truth. My marriage failed. Renata chose to respond to its failures in a way I could not accept and cannot excuse. I contributed to the conditions that preceded that choice in ways I have thought about more carefully in the year since than in the 8 years before. Isla drew me a horse last week. It was a large brown horse with an enormous and improbable mane, and she had written at the bottom in her careful printing, "For Dad. This is a strong horse. I have it on my refrigerator. I am 38 years old and I am teaching myself, slowly, how to look at the things I'd rather not see. It's uncomfortable work. It's also, I've come to believe, the only kind that matters. The strongest structures are not the ones that never bear weight. They're the ones built with honest materials." This resolution is distinguished by its refusal to resolve cleanly in either direction. The attempt at reconciliation, for months of genuine effort, complicates the morality play that betrayal narratives often reduce to. Marcus does not leap to divorce. He does not forgive and forget. He does something more difficult. He investigates whether repair is possible, concludes honestly that it is not, and accepts that conclusion without turning it into a story of defeat. Renata's eventual acknowledgement that the affair was partly a way of answering a deeper question about her own life reframes her not as simply a deceiver but as someone who lacked the directness or the courage to ask that question openly within the marriage. This does not exonerate her, but it does humanize her. The Isla detail, the horse drawings on the window ledge, the strong horse at the end, anchors the resolution in the thing that matters most. The child's continued sense of safety and belonging in both spaces her parents now occupy. Marcus's closing philosophy, borrowed from his professional worldview, lands as earned wisdom rather than performance. Structures built with honest materials. He spent the story learning what materials his marriage had actually been made of. He is now, with full knowledge and clear eyes, beginning to build something else. This story's architecture differs from a standard betrayal narrative in one critical respect. It distributes moral complexity evenly rather than concentrating it in a single figure. Renata's betrayal is real and inexcusable. Marcus's neglect of emotional labor is real and consequential. The marriage's failure has multiple, overlapping causes that no single party fully owns. What makes this narratively and psychologically unusual is that Marcus, a man whose professional identity is built around the fair reading of evidence, ultimately applies that fairness to himself. He does not weaponize his own victimhood. He does not allow the genuine wrong done to him to insulate him from the harder question of what he contributed. This is rare, both in life and in fiction. The story's central theme is visibility. Renata's behavior was invisible to Marcus for months because he chose comfort over scrutiny. His contribution to the marriage's failure was invisible to him for years because he had defined good husband too narrowly and never asked her to revise the definition. The daughter, Isla, serves as the story's moral anchor, her horse drawings, her matter-of-fact marking of both apartments as hers, her strong horse for dad, representing a child's capacity to absorb disruption and continue finding beauty, a capacity that both parents would do well to study. Final image, honest materials, is this story's deepest argument, that what we build is only as durable as our willingness to see it clearly.